Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and I'm here at the Wallace collection with Dr. Tobias Capwell. And we have a rare opportunity to get up close and personal with this amazing armour. Tell us about it.
This is one of the earliest German Renaissance armours to be made in the so-called Landsknecht style. In modern scholarship, they're often referred to as costume armours, but I think that calling them that leads to a lot of mistaken assumptions. These are very flamboyant, beautifully sculpted and etched and gilded to evoke the puffed and slashed style of clothing of this period. A style of clothing is very much closely originating with the Landsknechts themselves, the German and Swiss mercenaries who really played a key role in military evolution and indeed revolution in the 16th century. So this is an armor made for a high-ranking German or Austrian nobleman, but someone who also wants to demonstrate his affinity with these hardened mercenary soldiers.
Okay, so in a sense he's not a Landsknecht himself. He's trying to allude to that image, I suppose.
That's the likelihood. I mean, a lot of Landsknechts didn't wear armor at all, but some of the more important, the standard bearers, the elite soldiers, captains did wear various types of armor, but none of them really were this elevated. I think what we're dealing with here is a very high-ranking nobleman in the Habsburg court who just wants to express his totally up-to-the-minute fashion and military awareness.
Right, and so what we've got here is we've got arm defences which incorporate shoulder defences, boulders of sort I suppose, with a cuirass with essentially going down to just above the knees, isn't it?
And this is all that it ever was. It is missing a gorget.
Okay.
It probably had a helmet of some kind, but an infantry helmet of one form or another. And it may also have had hand plates of some kind.
Okay.
But that's all we can be sure of.
Would it have had a
codpiece?
Of
course, a codpiece.
I can notice a little hole down there where presumably the codpiece would have been, a big, proud codpiece would have been.
Of course.
And someone's taken that at some point as a souvenir.
They often go missing. And this has been gone ever since we've known about the armor from the early 19th century. It was already gone.
Right, okay.
So this armor is missing some pieces, but it's still the majority of what existed. And it's an armor for infantry combat.
Yeah.
There is some evidence to show that even in the very early 16th century, there were certain kinds of militaristic infantry foot combat that were performed in a courtly context. I wouldn't call it a tournament exactly, but a tournament-like encounter in formal settings.
Okay.
And that seems to be, possibly what this is for. It's not impossible that it could be for warfare as well.
Yeah.
But it is exclusively an infantry armor. There's no placement for a lance rest. The tassets enclose the legs a little more than they would otherwise. The arms are fully enclosed. All of this, and they've got the butt plates as well.
Right, okay.
The hind plates.
It wouldn't be the most comfortable armour to wear on horseback.
It's not what you wear for horseback.
No.
This is a very early type of foot combat armor.
Just a question about the gorget. I assume that would have gone underneath the breastplate, and these would have had pins on them?
What we have here actually are the fragments of the shoulder caps of the missing gorget. We have two fragments. The pins are modern, but they show you how the shoulders are attached. But you would have had a whole gorget with an articulated neck, and then these shoulder caps that the arms mount on.
So the arms basically hang off that point, a bit like where the old arming point would have been on earlier.
Almost invariably the gorget should be under the cuirass. This whole modern thing in TV and whatever of wearing gorgets over the cuirass is just a horrible nonsense.
Well, and of course it means that anything that comes up here can go underneath and get at your neck potentially.
It's horrible. I hate it. Proper armor has got that it's got this nice big turned roped stop there. You can imagine it. It's annoying that it's missing, of course.
So obviously it's made in this puffed and slashed style, as I would call it, and that's emulating the clothing that was very fashionable, particularly with the Landsknecht in this period. But what's interesting, being up close to it, from my perspective, is how mechanically it's a typical cuirass. It's got all of the things there, it's got a small waistline here, it's got a solid breastplate which comes out at the kind of, beer belly shape here, which provides a good strong shape for things to deflect off and structure. And then you've got a fold here with laminated lames, but it's a bit hidden when you first look at it. And this is the point, I guess. The armour, the nature of the armour, the articulations you're used to seeing on armour are sort of hidden by the disguise of this clothing pattern.
This is all about technical and aesthetic cleverness. The challenge to the artist to make hardened steel look like flowing silk and velvet. So they're hiding the articulations in some clever ways, minimizing things like the side wings on the elbow.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Doing whatever they can to create the effect.
I'd never even noticed that before, but those wings are a typical shape, but in miniature.
Right.
So they're still functional, but they sort of are disguised in the costume. And we should also mention the awesome articulation on the inside of the bend of the elbow.
Yeah, this is a nice early example of that. Those are original voiders of plate, you could call them. They're unnecessary, but they're really cool. It's like electric windows on your car are unnecessary but cool. And things like that, technical additions like that, speak also just to the luxury and prestige of the armor. And in foot combat, they're nice to have.
I'd personally rather have that than mail, based on some recent tests we've done. But yeah, I mean, it's an enormous expense and amount of effort to go to. It shows, again, it's like you say, it's prestige, isn't it? Do we know anything about the metallurgy of this?
It's very high quality, hardened and tempered carbon steel.
So it's about fully functional?
Yes, it is. It's about as good as it gets. And it was made by Konrad Zeusenhofer, who was one of the greatest ever masters of armor metallurgy as well as the sculptural aspect.
So nobody should think of this as a parade armor or a costume piece. It is a fully functional, hardened steel piece of protective.
I'll go so far as to say there's almost no such thing as parade armor. At least not until the later 16th century.
Okay.
You can't call something parade armor just because it's rich looking.
Yeah.
You have to have much more specific information to label something non-functional or ceremonial or purely parade or whatever. There is such a thing, but the vast majority of what is commonly thought of that way is not anything of the kind.
What sort of date is this?
This was made right around 1515.
Oh wow! So it is quite early.
It is one of the earliest realizations of the puffed and slashed style in metal.
Amazing. So here he is back in his cabinet now, so we were going to talk a little bit about the decoration, weren't we? Because it's quite, the detail of decoration here is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this idea of simulating or referring playfully to textile clothing and metal was really a totally original, almost totally original idea at this moment in the early 16th century. And obviously it's sculpted to look like puffed and slashed clothing, but it's also gilded to look like puffed and slashed clothing. Selective gilding of the slashes evokes a cloth of gold interlining showing through the exterior slashed fabric. And then it's also etched to look like textile. You can see this kind of, what seems like kind of rudimentary floral etching. You could be forgiven for looking at that and thinking, hey, as far as Renaissance etchers go, this doesn't look very good. But they're not trying to make it look like foliage. They're trying to make it look like foliage represented on voided velvet, Italian cloth of gold velvet. So the proud areas where you have the flowers and things are meant to be gold and probably were selectively gilded. There's traces of it around.
Okay.
And then the background would have represented the velvet pile.
Okay.
And if you look really closely, you can even see that instead of the usual granulated background that you usually get on German etching of this period, instead you've got these little crescent-shaped loops that have been painstakingly applied with something like a pig's bristle. I mean, it's really remarkable technically. And those little loops are meant to evoke the loops of gold wire that were pulled through the voided velvet. It's an Italian technique called allucciolato.
Wow.
Which evokes stars shining in the night sky.
Okay.
So these little loops of gold thread were designed to make the colored red or blue velvet sparkle. Again, and then you have the gold figures against that. So this is all what the etcher is trying to evoke.
And of course we've mostly now just got a polished steel finish, but when this was new, when this was newly done with all that gilding bright, it would have looked absolutely mind-bogglingly stunning, I imagine.
And it's possible that some of these areas were also heat blued.
Yeah.
This is again another technique, the bluing, that's very fashionable amongst imperial armorers, working both in Augsburg and in Innsbruck. So this could have been a purple and gold armor, or an iridescent blue and gold armor. There aren't any traces of original heat tinting on the armor now, so we can't be sure. But it makes a lot of sense in the context of everything else that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who isn't aware, so etching is done with acid, essentially. So you put a resisting surface on, then you scratch away the bits you want the acid to act on, and you put your acid on. So you sort of burn into the surface. And it's shallow, but there's just enough contrast, isn't there, between the bit which the acid has acted on and the bit which has been resisted.
Right.
So you can feel it under the fingers, but it's very, very shallow. So it doesn't remove a lot of the material.
And this is, again, right around 1515.
Yeah.
This is very early days for the puffed and slash style, very early days for the technology of etching too.
And there's also engraving on there as well, and the difference, so etching done with acid and then engraving done with a tool, essentially a little chisel or file, and there's engraving I see around the puffed bits as well.
Right.
So you've got a whole bunch of different techniques all on one small area. It's absolutely amazing. So just to kind of wrap up, I was curious about what type of hat or helmet you think would be worn with this get-up.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that there are three of these that are the real primary examples of the type.
Yeah.
You know, foot combat armors in the Landsknecht style. And none of them have helmets.
Okay.
Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, but it could be also because there was never really a meaningful helmet to begin with.
Maybe not a matching piece, you know.
Well, one really plausible suggestion has been that it would have just been worn with a steel skull cap, worn under a big giant Landsknecht hat.
Like shown in Dura's plates, yeah.
Most Landsknechts, when they're wearing this fabulous clothing, didn't wear helmets at all. They just wore these big hats, often thrown back on their shoulders.
Or with a skull cap underneath, which you wouldn't see.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it makes kind of sense that would certainly be one plausible option. But, as I've said, there's a possibility that this could have been worn for a kind of formal, courtly combat on foot.
Okay.
In which case, if you're fighting with spears or pikes or whatever,
You need a helmet.
So your next option is probably something like a Cascatel. It's an early form of burgonet. A rounded skull and a big peak and an articulated rear.
Maybe cheek
pieces, yeah. And then you could probably even stretch your imagination to some kind of face defense, like a falling buff. And that all still works within the period and the style, and you could expect that in that case the helmet would have the same bands of puffed and slash decoration. It would refer to the style of the whole armor. If you wanted to build one like that and you put that kind of helmet on it, it would look good, and you know, it would serve the purpose admirably.
Yeah. So yeah, so really, so the gorget, the potential helmet, if there was one, the codpiece, that's all that's missing from here. Oh, and some type
possibly.
of possibly even male ones. They sometimes had at that point,
plates
didn't
with
they?
male fingers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting possibilities.
And you mentioned to me how rare these are. There's that you've got one here, and there's only a few littered around in other museums in the world. So this is really a fantastic thing. So if you are coming to the Wallace collection, look out for this one. I think it's difficult to miss, isn't it? I've heard it described as the Michelin Man arm.
It does have a muscular aesthetic.
It's got, yeah, exactly, and it's an important one to look out for. So it's easy when you come to this collection to get almost swamped by the amount of quality and items here. So this is one to look out for, and hopefully some of you will now come and look at this with a bit more appreciation, having seen this. So thank you very much.
All right.
And we'll see you again soon. Cheers, folks.